In October 1985, a highway mowing crew in Smith County, Texas, made a gruesome discovery. Human skeletal remains hidden in a brushy gully beside Interstate 20. The victim was an unidentified young woman, and for almost 40 years, her name and story remained unknown. Today, we know that she was Gina Crow, a 27-year-old new mother from Arlington who vanished in 1984 and became the center of a decades-long mystery. Gina was a young Texas mother with an extremely tumultuous personal life. By 1984, at age 26, she had been through multiple marriages, the latest in January 1984 to a man named Dwight Crow. That summer, she gave birth to a daughter in July 1984, but not long after, Gina vanished without a trace. Because her family lived out of state and didn't even know about her new marriage or baby, no one reported Gina missing when she disappeared in late 1984. In the wake of her disappearance, Gina's husband, Dwight, told people that his wife had left voluntarily and cut off contact. He even sent their infant daughter to live with Gina's relatives in Alabama, as he claimed he couldn't care for the baby alone. With Gina's family initially unaware of any potential foul play and no police inquiry, her absence flew under the radar. It would be many months before the truth of her fate began to surface. On October 1st, 1985, more than a year after Gina's disappearance, a Texas highway work crew made a grim discovery in Smith County. While mowing brush along Interstate 20 near the Highway 69 exit, workers stumbled upon human skeletal remains in a gully about 75 feet from the road. Scattered near the bones was a pile of clothing, a yellow shirt emblazoned with Top Rail Country Music, Dallas, Texas, which turned out to be a souvenir from a local bar. She also had a gold butterfly earring and a gold wristwatch were also found in the dirt nearby. Investigators determined the victim was a young woman, and it appeared someone had tried to deliberately hide her body under the brush. Based on the condition of the remains, they estimated she had been dead for about 12 to 15 months, placing her death in the latter half of 1984. This timeline aligned eerily with the period when Gina Crow went missing. While the autopsy couldn't reveal the cause of death, the location in which her body was discovered meant it was investigated as a homicide. For decades, the case remained unsolved and the young woman remained unidentified. No one had realized that the missing Gina Crow and this Jane Doe were the same person, since Gina was never reported missing to authorities. Furthermore, Gina had been living in the Dallas-Fort Worth area, whereas the remains turned up in East Texas, making the link even harder to recognize. Gina's family was left with painful questions. Her father even speculated that because she often hitchhiked, she might have been picked up by a serial predator like Ted Bundy. By 2021, with the trail long cold, the sheriff's office finally tried a new approach, enlisting the DNA Doe Project to help put a name to their Jane Doe. Specialists managed to extract a DNA profile from the old skeletal remains and uploaded it to genealogy databases. By late 2023, their research pointed to a missing woman named Gina Crow. Detectives soon tracked down Gina Crow's relatives, her mother in Fort Worth and her now adult daughter in Alabama, and obtained their DNA. As a result of these efforts, the sheriff's office announced the identification in April 2024, restoring Gina's name nearly 40 years after she vanished. Even with Gina's identity known, the mystery of her death remains. No definitive cause of death could be determined, but investigators believe she was undoubtedly killed and her body dumped to hide the crime. Naturally, suspicion centers on the person closest to her at the time, her husband, Dwight Crow. He had a history of heavy drinking, and there are allegations that he engaged in violence towards her. Further, when Gina vanished, he claimed she left on her own. Dwight never reported Gina missing, and his behavior struck her family as highly suspicious. Although Dwight is now deceased, one investigator on the case has stated he believes Dwight was likely responsible for Gina's death. If that is true, Dwight escaped justice, but the investigation remains open. Also, just a quick strange footnote on the case. Gina had previously been married to a convicted serial killer named Larry Keith Robinson. While he was permanently locked up at the time of her death, investigators have considered whether he used his contacts on the outside to orchestrate the event. Personally, I think this is much less likely than her husband having done it, but ultimately, this is an avenue that investigators are going down. April 8th, 1988. Along the Lake Michigan shoreline near New Buffalo, Michigan, authorities recovered the remains of an unidentified woman. To local investigators, she became known only as the New Buffalo Jane Doe, a mysterious victim with no name and an uncertain fate. For nearly 4 decades, the identity of this woman and the story of what happened to her remained a haunting puzzle. Today, we know that the woman found that day was Dorothy Glanton, a 71-year-old Chicago resident who had vanished months earlier. For decades, both her family and the police wondered who she was and how she ended up in the lake, until cutting-edge science finally provided answers, though not the full story. Dorothy Glanton was a 71-year-old resident of Chicago's Bronzeville neighborhood in 1987. Born in Alabama and raised in Chicago from the 1920s onward, her family moved north during the Great Migration, and Dorothy had very deep roots in her community. On December 9, 1987, she left her home on South Prairie Avenue, telling a family member she was headed to a local drugstore and would be back soon. It was a routine errand on an ordinary day, but Dorothy never returned home. Concerned relatives reported her missing to Chicago police that very evening. Officers and family members combed the neighborhood and checked local hospitals and shelters, but no trace of Dorothy was found. In the weeks that followed, her family frantically searched and even took out newspaper ads pleading for Dorothy to contact them. 4 months after Dorothy's disappearance, an unsettling discovery took place far from her neighborhood. On April 8, 1988, near the shoreline of Lake Michigan by New Buffalo, a passerby spotted a woman's body floating in the water. Police were called, and the remains of a female were pulled from the lake. The body was decomposed after months in the water, making visual identification impossible. Investigators carefully noted the unknown woman's features and clothing for clues. She had brown hair and was found dressed in men's blue jeans with a striped belt, a pair of shorts and pantyhose underneath, and black ankle boots. These odd details gave police some hints about the woman's appearance and attire, but nothing that immediately revealed who she was. An autopsy provided a few more insights. The Jane Doe had a long surgical scar on her abdomen and evidence of a past hysterectomy. She also had extensive dental work, including a porcelain dental bridge on a front tooth and gold crowns, indicating she'd received high-quality dental care in recent years. The examiner noted her teeth were in good condition with little staining, suggesting she didn't smoke or drink. These clues implied the unknown woman might have been older and of a relatively affluent background in life. Still, nothing in her physical description or medical history was distinctive enough to match her to a name. With no identification on the body and no immediate matches to missing person reports, authorities were left stumped. Unable to identify the body, Michigan authorities treated the case as a Jane Doe investigation. Based on the state of the remains, police initially assumed the victim was a white woman in her 40s or 50s. This erroneous profile sent investigators down the wrong path. They compared the Jane Doe's description against missing persons cases from around the region, but none fit the limited details they had. Investigators even entered the case into national missing persons databases to seek a match, but nothing turned up. Despite these efforts, no leads emerged and the trail went cold, likely because Dorothy was an elderly black woman, not a middle-aged white woman. Meanwhile, Dorothy Glanton's family in Chicago heard nothing about the body in New Buffalo. They continued to search for Dorothy in the Chicago area, utterly unaware that she had already been found deceased across state lines. The newspaper plea they published in August 1988, imploring Dorothy to come home as soon as possible, received no answer. For decades, the New Buffalo Jane Doe lay buried without a name in a Benton Harbor cemetery, and Dorothy's family had no closure, and it seemed like a hopeless mystery. In 2021, Michigan State Police decided to reopen the investigation into the New Buffalo Jane Doe. Detectives had the unknown woman's remains exhumed to obtain DNA samples for advanced testing. Using modern forensic technology, they developed a DNA profile and in 2023 enlisted the help of the DNA Doe Project. Before long, the DNA results yielded a surprise that corrected the old assumptions. The genetic data revealed that the Jane Doe was actually an African-American woman in her 70s, not a middle-aged white woman as previously believed. At one point, the genealogy team even wondered if the unidentified remains might belong to a daughter of Dorothy Glanton, due to the age confusion. They soon realized the supposed daughter never existed. The Jane Doe was in fact Dorothy herself. Armed with this new understanding, researchers homed in on a family originally from Alabama and a woman who had moved to Chicago as a child. By comparing the Jane Doe's DNA with Dorothy's relatives, investigators finally confirmed that the unidentified remains belonged to Dorothy Glanton. In November 2025, nearly 38 years after Dorothy disappeared, the Michigan State Police announced that the New Buffalo Jane Doe had been positively identified. At long last, the nameless victim had a name. This development brought a bittersweet sense of relief. Dorothy's surviving family members, after so many years of wondering, finally learned her fate and could hold a proper remembrance for her. Now that Dorothy has been identified, one big question remains. How did she end up in Lake Michigan so far from home? The autopsy back in 1988 suggested that drowning was the likely cause of death, but investigators couldn't determine whether her drowning was accidental, self-inflicted, or the result of foul play. One theory that's currently being considered is that she slipped and fell accidentally into the water. However, no one seems to explain how she ended up in New Buffalo to begin with, which adds a great deal of uncertainty to this theory. As you'll recall, she informed her family member that she was just quickly running out to the pharmacist and would be back shortly. Personally, I suspect that foul play must have been involved here, though at present there's just not enough evidence to say if this is the case conclusively. The cold waters of Lake Michigan still hold the secrets of what happened to Dorothy, but at least they no longer hold her identity. Hey everyone, it's Jimmy here with another reminder to hit subscribe and the notification bell if you're appreciating my content. Also, if you want to toss a clam or two my way, feel free to check out the YouTube membership or the Patreon. A passerby walking along Portland, Maine's waterfront on the spring morning of May 22, 2015, made a chilling discovery. It was the body of an unidentified woman washed ashore on the rocky beach. She was strikingly well dressed, wearing a white sweatshirt emblazoned with the word bride in rhinestones and other layered clothing, and carrying $500 cash. Yet she carried no identification, and this mystery woman came to be known as the Portland Jane Doe. Investigators found no immediate signs of foul play, describing the death as an apparent drowning. Nearly a decade later, Her true name remains unknown, and the case is still unsolved. On May 22, 2015, at around 6:10 in the morning, a passerby walking the Eastern Promenade Trail in Portland noticed a waterlogged body on the rocks by Casco Bay. The woman appeared to be of Asian descent and was estimated to be between 30 and 50 years old, standing about 5 feet 1 inch tall and weighing around 100 pounds. Distinctively, she had cosmetically tattooed eyebrows and a well-healed horizontal scar about 6 inches long on her lower abdomen. This was consistent with a past cesarean section surgery. Examiners also noted that she had very extensive, high-quality dental work for someone with no identity on record. Despite having these physical details, authorities initially had no meaningful leads for this Jane Doe. Despite all her distinctive clothing, including that bride hoodie, she had no shoes on her feet. Her accessories included a yellow metal quartz watch, dangling bird-shaped earrings, a floral ring, and a black butterfly hair clip. Along with these items, she carried $500 in cash in her pocket. The fact that her jewelry and money were left untouched suggested that robbery wasn't a factor in her death. Some wondered if she had come to Portland from elsewhere. The city has a ferry link to Canada, but this remains only speculation. Police initially announced that the death did not appear suspicious. An autopsy later confirmed that the cause of death was drowning, and investigators ruled it likely that she had done it herself. She had likely been in the water for only about 1 day when discovered. No signs of trauma or struggle were found, reinforcing the finding of no foul play involved. Her fingerprints and DNA were run through databases in 2015, and again in subsequent years, but no identification was made. Investigators theorized that she might not have been from the local area at all, or that her family wasn't aware she was missing. Officials noted that families sometimes fail to report an adult missing if they think she's safely living her life. By 2018, with no leads from traditional methods, the Maine authorities turned to advanced genetic genealogy to seek this Jane Doe's identity. The DNA Doe Project took on her case, uploading her genetic profile to a public database to search for relatives. Before long, the DNA data yielded a few distant cousin matches. From these, analysts deduced that she likely had family ties in the New York tri-state area and was probably a recent immigrant from South Korea. Unfortunately, the genetic genealogy process was and remains extremely painstaking. The matches were only distant relatives, third or fourth cousins, which made building her family tree difficult. Further, fewer people of Korean American descent have tested their DNA, limiting the pool of matches. Compounding this issue, according to reports, the technology has gained little traction in South Korea, as people are already aware that they are of Korean ancestry. Today, the Portland Jane Doe case endures as an open mystery. After more than 10 years, investigators haven't given up on giving this woman back her name. The ongoing genetic genealogy research continues, and the team remains hopeful that one day a clear match will emerge. However, this case does show the limits of this technology for people from ethnic backgrounds that aren't likely to show an interest in genetic testing. For now, her identity remains an enduring enigma in Maine's cold case files, still awaiting a solution to its tragic mystery. In the pre-dawn darkness of July 8, 1993, the quiet town of Charlton, New York, woke up to an unimaginable tragedy. 37-year-old Betty Conley was found shot on the floor of the convenience store where she worked. She had been a beloved mother and wife, and her life was taken for the sake of roughly $100 stolen from the register. Charlton was the kind of rural community where nobody locked their doors and kids roamed freely after dark. The violent end of such a familiar face in this peaceful setting shook the town, and launched a decades-long quest for answers. Betty Conley spent the evening of July 7th, 1993, cheering on her daughter at a softball game before heading to work the night shift at the Extra Mart convenience store on Route 67. The store had only recently started staying open 24 hours, and Betty was helping cover overnight shifts. Sometime around 2:10, an unknown assailant entered the store and ambushed Betty from behind the counter. The intruder fired a single shot to the back of her head with a pistol. The perpetrator then grabbed what little money was in the register and fled into the darkness. At about 3 o'clock that morning, a customer came into the Extra Mart and stumbled upon a horrific scene. Betty's lifeless body lay on the floor behind the counter. Police were summoned immediately. In a grim twist, responding officers recognized Betty as a neighbor, yet they still needed a family member to identify her. Betty's husband, Bruce, was awakened at dawn by police and brought to the scene to confirm that the victim was indeed his wife, slain in the apparent robbery. Saratoga County Sheriff's investigators quickly began working Betty's case, but from the start they faced major challenges. The store's only security camera had been knocked to the floor, so no footage of the crime was captured. Physical evidence at the scene was scant. The crime scene was also not properly preserved, and for reasons that are unclear, the convenience store was allowed to reopen shortly after the shooting. This likely destroyed or contaminated any fingerprints or DNA the perpetrator left behind. In fact, the shell casing wasn't discovered until days later, after the store had reopened for business. Investigators analyzed the bullet and tested numerous firearms across New York, but never found a weapon that matched. Witnesses did offer some crucial clues. Several people reported seeing a suspicious car near the Extra Mart around the time of the slaying. It was described as a white mid-1980s sedan with rust on the driver's door that had been partially covered by primer paint. Likewise, a tall, clean-shaven white male, around 6 feet 2 inches and 35 years old, with shoulder-length blonde hair, was seen in the area that night. This individual became the focus of early leads, but he was never identified or located by police. No arrests were made, and no justice was served in the immediate aftermath. With the mystery still unsolved, many locals began to speculate that the culprit must have been someone from the area. The Extra Mart's location was isolated, and its overnight hours were new, details that an outsider passing through would be unlikely to know. Some also considered the possibility of a drifter or truck driver randomly committing the crime, but investigators found no evidence supporting an out-of-town suspect. Over the years, numerous tips and rumors have pointed to a few individuals in or around Charlton. Detectives followed up on these leads and interviewed people repeatedly, but no solid evidence ever emerged to name a definitive suspect. As in most cases, investigators also scrutinized the victim's family. Bruce Conley was investigated for weeks. He cooperated fully, passed a polygraph, and was ultimately cleared of suspicion. His personal firearm did not match the bullet used, and none of his vehicles matched the white sedan seen that night. According to some later reports, many, including Linda Conley, her daughter, have been highly critical of this intensive initial focus on his father. By the time Bruce was cleared, there were few other leads for police to chase, leaving the town anxious and frustrated. Further, this may explain why the store was allowed to reopen so soon, and why there wasn't a thorough search done of the premises. The cops thought they had their man, and then when it was very clear it wasn't him, the evidence they potentially needed to break the case had already been destroyed. Ultimately, I suspect that this case will never be solved given the fact that the police botched the initial investigation. That said, that shell casing does provide the last glimmer of hope that there will one day be justice for Betty Conley and her family. Wendy Michelle was just 30 years old when her life was brutally cut short in the summer of 1990. That July, a farmer in rural Illinois stumbled upon the body of an unknown young woman in his soybean field. For over 3 decades, she remained known only as the Madison County Jane Doe, until a recent forensic breakthrough finally gave her back her name. While the perpetrator of this horrific act on Wendy still walks free, the authorities are now one step closer to bringing him to justice. Wendy, who was born Winona Michelle in 1959, led a life as dynamic as it was unpredictable. She was described by those who knew her as a loving, fun person with a kind heart and a great love for animals. By age 23, she was married and had 2 children, demonstrating a nurturing side even as she maintained an adventurous spirit. Wendy's life took her across the country. She was born in Los Angeles, raised in Tennessee from toddlerhood, and spent her teen years in Vero Beach in Florida. In the mid-1980s, she moved to Northern California, but she never stayed put for long. Always restless and eager to travel, Wendy was known to hitch rides with long-haul truck drivers during her journeys. In April 1990, she and her kids took a bus trip back to Nashville, Tennessee, where she left her children in the care of family before venturing out on her own. By May 1990, Wendy was spotted during a brief visit with relatives in the Washington, D.C. area. Notably, she was in the company of an unknown man who worked as a truck driver. This would be the last time her family ever saw her. Wendy's penchant for travel meant it wasn't unusual for her loved ones to lose track of her whereabouts for stretches of time. But as months passed with no word, her family grew concerned, and sadly, they would not learn of her true fate for 35 long years. On July 20th, 1990, the mystery woman's body, not yet known to be Wendy, was discovered in that soybean field outside the small city of Troy, Illinois. The location was a patch of farmland near a rural road intersection, a quiet place that became the scene of a horrific crime. Investigators noted that the victim was found without clothing, except for a pair of white sandals on her feet and a silver ring with a turquoise heart on her finger. Some of her clothing, including a pink Florida t-shirt and undergarments, were found tossed along a path leading toward the body. It appeared the perpetrator had scattered her belongings, perhaps in an attempt to destroy evidence or stage the scene. The young woman had been savagely attacked in a way that shocked investigators. Several of her internal organs were missing. Her reproductive organs had been apparently removed, a disturbing detail that underscored the perpetrator's disturbed intent. Strangely, forensic examiners found no defensive wounds on the victim's body. This suggested that she might have been overpowered very quickly, or even slain elsewhere, and then hauled to the site and dumped in that field, potentially supporting the staging theory. The condition of the remains indicated she had likely been deceased for at least several days, but perhaps even as much as a week, before the farmer came across the body. Notably, the length of the post-mortem interval, the period between when the individual perished and when they were found, may play a role in whether this case gets solved. But I'll get into that shortly. For now, back to 1990. The Madison County Sheriff's Office launched an intensive investigation, pouring hundreds of hours into chasing down leads. They had the unenviable task of trying to identify a victim with no name and no obvious connection to the area. Detectives circulated forensic sketches of the woman's face and carefully preserved the evidence found with the body. The case was entered into national databases for missing and unidentified persons, hoping to match the Jane Doe to someone reported missing, but no match turned up. Despite their efforts, the trail went cold, and as months turned into years, and then decades, the Madison County Doe case remained unsolved. The victim's identity a stubborn mystery. She was laid to rest in a local cemetery under a headstone that gave no name, only an epitaph for a Jane Doe who had been cruelly taken before her time. For nearly 35 years, Wendy's family had no idea what became of her. They feared the worst after so long with no contact, but they had no closure and always held on to hope that she was somewhere out there alive. Meanwhile, her case file sat gathering dust until late 2024, when advances in forensic science offered new hope. Investigators decided to take a fresh look at the cold case using modern DNA technology. The Madison County Sheriff's Office teamed up with the Illinois State Police Crime Lab and Othram to re-examine physical evidence from the 1990 crime scene. Othram's scientists applied cutting-edge forensic-grade genome sequencing to build a comprehensive DNA profile from the tiny, degraded samples. From there, they turned to forensic genetic genealogy, a method that involves comparing the unknown DNA profile to genealogical databases to find familial matches. By early 2025, this DNA sleuthing paid off, and Othram's team discovered genetic matches that led them to potential relatives of the unidentified victim. Detectives tracked down these family members and obtained reference DNA swabs from them, which confirmed the relationship. The identification was officially announced on July 1st, 2025, bringing a mix of sorrow and relief to Wendy's surviving family. Wendy's brother came out and released a statement on behalf of the family, saying that they were devastated. That said, they expressed gratitude for the hard work by all the investigators in locating their missing family member. With Wendy's identity uncovered, the focus has now shifted to catching the perpetrator. The nature of the crime has led to some chilling theories. One major theory is that Wendy fell victim to a serial predator who stalked women along Midwestern highways. Wendy's habit of hitchhiking with truck drivers in 1990 put her in contact with many strangers on the road. It's possible that the unknown man she was last seen with, the truck driver in D.C., could have been involved in her death, or perhaps she met another assailant as she traveled west. Long-haul trucking routes have infamously been corridors for serial offenders targeting vulnerable women. Another compelling lead links Wendy's case to an earlier unsolved mystery in the same region. In 1986, 4 years before Wendy's death, a 27-year-old woman named Leah Chavez was found slain in a cornfield near Lebanon, Illinois, just one county over. The similarities are striking. Like Wendy, Leah was found in a similar condition, with evidence that the perpetrator had attempted to surgically remove her reproductive organs. Both women had no defensive wounds, suggesting a surprise attack or some other form of incapacitation. The eerie congruence in the violence done to Wendy and Leah Chavez has led some to suspect the same perpetrator may have been responsible for both. Notably, Leah also lived a similar free-spirited drifter-type lifestyle, much like Wendy. In fact, authorities and criminologists have pointed to Larry Hall as a possible suspect. Hall is a convicted kidnapper and a suspected serial perpetrator with 2 confirmed victims, and potentially dozens more. He was active in the Midwest during the 1980s and early 1990s. While Hall has never been charged with Wendy's slaying, investigators are actively considering his involvement. Notably, it's unclear if male DNA evidence was found at the scene, but if it was, it's likely that Larry Hall wasn't the perpetrator. Since he's currently incarcerated for his crimes, and given the severe nature of what he's been convicted for, his DNA profile would have been cross-referenced in a database. That said, it's always possible that the DNA evidence was too degraded, and that Othram scientists are currently working on that piece of the puzzle as well. Others have theorized that the perpetrator may have been someone much closer to her, who used her drifter lifestyle as cover to eliminate her far from home. Under this theory, the disturbing acts committed to her body may have been an attempt to make this look like a copycat-type incident. That said, This theory is highly speculative, and it's unknown whether Wendy had any individuals in her life who wished to do her harm. Hey everyone, it's Jimmy with the usual quick reminder to hit like, subscribe, and the notification bell and turn on all notifications. Also, don't forget to leave a quick comment saying where you're listening from, or just drop a quick "I'm doing my part." On a cold December night in 2021, a shocking discovery was made in a Belgrade apartment. Kristina Dukic, a 21-year-old gaming YouTuber and streamer who went by Kika, was found dead under puzzling circumstances. To her hundreds of thousands of fans, Kika's sudden death was devastating, but in the days and months that followed, her passing became embroiled in dark mystery and speculation. Was this vibrant influencer driven to end her life by relentless cyberbullying? Or, as some chilling clues suggest, was Kika actually eliminated by someone in her inner circle? In the end, a shocking discovery by this young YouTuber's mother would raise serious questions about a cover-up. Kika was a Serbian influencer famed in her home country for her online gaming content. Born in 2000 and raised in Belgrade, she launched her YouTube channel as a teenager in 2015 and quickly rose to fame as a gaming prodigy. Kika was one of the very few female gaming YouTubers in Serbia at the time, which helped her amass a large following at a young age. She initially posted Minecraft videos, but later expanded to popular titles like Grand Theft Auto 5, Counter-Strike, and League of Legends, along with vlogs and comedy skits. By 2021, her YouTube channel had garnered over 700,000 subscribers and tens of millions of views, and she had more than 400,000 followers on Instagram. Notably, she produced her content exclusively in Serbian, making her a fairly major celebrity in this country of only 6.5 million people. Kika even competed semi-professionally in Counter-Strike, earning a reputation as one of Serbia's top female players. Off-screen, Kika was described as energetic and outgoing, often featuring her family and friends in her videos. Fans were drawn to her humor and candid personality. However, life in the public eye also exposed Kika to the toxic side of internet fame. As a young woman breaking into a male-dominated gaming scene, she faced hateful comments from some corners of the internet. Unfortunately, this hostility would escalate dramatically in the years leading up to her death. In 2019, Kika became embroiled in an online feud that would haunt her thereafter. Her rival was Bogdan Ilic, better known as Baka Praz, Serbia's most followed YouTuber at the time. What began as social media sniping exploded into an ugly public conflict. The two influencers even confronted each other on a national television show, trading barbs in front of a live audience. After that clash, Kika became the target of a merciless cyberbullying campaign, allegedly orchestrated by his hardcore fan base. Baka Praz released a diss track ridiculing Kika and uploaded numerous videos which some claim egged on the trolls. Soon, Kika's social media pages were flooded with hateful messages, insults, mockery, and even urges that she should end herself. The harassment continued unabated right up until Kika's final days. Shockingly, even on the day her death was announced, cruel comments continued to pour in from internet trolls. Late on December 8th, 2021, tragedy struck. Kika was at her apartment in Belgrade that night, allegedly planning to celebrate her mother's birthday the next day. At around 11:40 p.m., police responding to an emergency call found Kika's lifeless body in her home. According to initial reports, there were no obvious signs of foul play at the scene. Some prescription medications were discovered near her, which led investigators to suspect an overdose from the outset. The devastating news became public the following day, December 9th, when Kika's mother, Natasha Dukic, announced her daughter's passing on social media. In those first days, the prevailing narrative was that Kika had done it herself, likely as a result of depression worsened by years of bullying. The Ministry of the Interior confirmed an investigation was ongoing, but gave no indication of third-party involvement. Few people doubted this initial conclusion. After all, Kika's case sadly fit a familiar pattern of an online bullying victim driven to despair. However, as more details emerged, disturbing questions began to arise about what exactly happened on that final night. After a thorough investigation over the ensuing months, authorities eventually closed Kika's case, but their official findings did little to quell the public's intrigue. In July 2022, the Belgrade Public Prosecutor's Office announced that forensic tests confirmed Kika had died from a fatal overdose. Police even went as far as to question Kika's former rival Baka Praz during the investigation, given the very public feud linking him to her distress. However, he was ultimately released the same day without charges. And ultimately, no one was held legally responsible for Kika's demise. Serbian authorities determined that while the online bullying she endured was cruel, there was no evidence of a direct crime against her. For most observers, the story might have ended there. An unfortunate act, a cautionary tale about online bullying taken too far. But Kika's family wasn't satisfied with the official version of events. From the start, her mother Natasha harbored grave doubts that her daughter truly did this to herself. As time passed, those doubts only grew, and a very different theory of Kika's death began to take shape. Natasha Dukic, Kika's mother, couldn't shake the feeling that something about the death didn't add up. In late July 2022, she released a bombshell video titled, "They Didn't Give Her a Chance to Survive," in which she publicly challenged the official story. She laid out a series of suspicious circumstances and inconsistencies surrounding Kika's death, effectively arguing that her daughter may have been killed by someone close to her. According to Kika's mother, several red flags point to the possibility of foul play. Disturbingly, a farewell note found on Kika's computer was proven to have been typed after she was already dead, strongly suggesting it was staged by someone else. Even more unsettling, someone logged into Kika's YouTube account the day before her death, and a pre-prepared death announcement was uploaded just hours after she died. When her sister identified the body, she noticed a bruise beneath Kika's eye, signs of a possible struggle never addressed in the autopsy. Potential evidence also went missing. Despite the building having cameras, police claimed no surveillance footage was available. Investigators oddly relied on Kika's friend for the apartment entry code rather than the family. There had also been escalating turmoil with an ex-boyfriend who had allegedly broken into her apartment and deleted her Instagram account that same day. Finally, despite official claims of prior attempts, Natasha insists Kika had never genuinely tried to end her life before, arguing that past incidents were just outbursts. Overall, these elements formed the foundation of the mother's belief that Kika didn't end herself, but was instead the victim of foul play. Taken together, these assertions paint a very different picture from the official narrative. Natasha Dukic strongly suspects that a third party orchestrated Kika's death. Today, the death of Kristina Dukic remains an emotionally charged and unresolved saga. Officially, her case is closed and ruled as an overdose, yet her family and many fans remain unconvinced, steadfast in their belief that the true circumstances were covered up and that a perpetrator might have gotten away. It's hard to ignore the troubling possibility that someone may have taken advantage of Kika's reputation for struggling with depression and used it as cover. Her emotional vulnerability was public knowledge, repeatedly weaponized by online trolls, which could have made it easier to construct a narrative that authorities would readily accept. When details like the note being typed after her death, missing surveillance footage, and the oddly timed login to her YouTube account are placed side by side, this looks suspicious. If a third party knew investigators would immediately lean toward her doing it herself, then staging the environment to fit that expectation would be disturbingly simple. In that sense, Kika's own public pain may have been used to hide what truly happened to her. It was a scorching summer morning on June 3, 1927, when Italy's cycling hero Ottavio Bottecchia set out on a training ride, one he would never finish. A farmer later found the two-time Tour de France winner lying bloodied and barely conscious by a country road near a vineyard in northeastern Italy. His skull was fractured and his collarbone was broken. Bottecchia's bicycle, curiously, was propped up nearby without a scratch, and there were no skid marks or any signs of a typical crash. Less than 2 weeks later, at just 32 years old, this famed cyclist was dead at the height of his fame, and a dark mystery had begun to take shape. Even now, a century later, the truth remains elusive, and the tale of Bottecchia's end continues to haunt cycling lore. Ottavio Bottecchia rose from humble beginnings to become one of the greatest cyclists of the 1920s. Born in 1894 as the eighth of 9 children in a poor Italian family, he had minimal schooling and worked as a shoemaker and bricklayer in his youth. He served in World War I as a bicycle courier, where he discovered a remarkable endurance for cycling while ferrying messages through mountainous battlefields. After the war, Bottecchia turned to competitive racing and rapidly made a name for himself. In 1924, he achieved a stunning victory in the Tour de France, becoming the first Italian to win that race, and he repeated the triumph in 1925. Despite his fame, Bottecchia remained the bricklayer of Friuli, a nickname recalling his working-class roots and ongoing reality. Beyond his athletic prowess, Bottecchia quietly harbored socialist, anti-fascist beliefs under Mussolini's regime. Though not openly political, he and his friends read anti-fascist pamphlets, and he made little secret of his disdain for Mussolini's rule. Ironically, Benito Mussolini himself donated money toward Bottecchia's cycling team in the early 1920s, perhaps hoping to bask in the glory of a national sports hero. By 1927, Bottecchia was a national icon, a 2-time Tour champion who was widely expected to vie for a 3rd Tour victory that year. In late May 1927, tragedy had already struck Bottecchia's family. His brother Giovanni was killed in a road accident, hit by a car while cycling near their hometown. Ottavio returned from France to Italy for the funeral and continued training. On June 3, 1927, just weeks before the next tour, he headed out alone at dawn for what he assumed would be a routine ride. He even asked for a hot bath to be ready for his return in a few hours. That ride would be his last. Later that morning, locals discovered Bottecchia collapsed beside a quiet road near the village of Pionis. And nope, you don't need to rewind there. That's the name. He was alive but barely, found with a bloodied head, a cracked skull, a broken collarbone, and other fractures. Villagers carried the unconscious champion to a nearby inn, where a priest administered last rites. He was then rushed by cart to a hospital in Gemona. Doctors struggled to make sense of Bottecchia's condition. Strangely, his bicycle was undamaged and found by the roadside, with no skid marks or scratches on the bike to suggest any crash. Given the searing heat that day, the immediate theory was that he collapsed from sunstroke and fell. Authorities quickly embraced this explanation and hastily closed the case. Officially, the tour hero's death was deemed a tragic accident, sunstroke, and bad luck. The convenient story even satisfied Bottecchia's family, who received a large insurance payout and had little reason to challenge it. He never regained consciousness to tell his side of the story. After nearly 12 days in a coma, he succumbed to his injuries on June 15, 1927. Italy mourned the loss of a champion, but as the shock subsided, murmurs of doubt grew louder. Many found it hard to believe that a rider of Botekia's skill would simply keel over from heat, neatly park his bike, and somehow crack his own skull in the fall. The circumstances were too unusual to accept at face value, and soon a dark question began to shadow Botekia's legacy. Nearly a century later, the death of Ottavio Bottecchia remains an unsolved mystery. Over the years, a slew of alleged confessions and conspiracy theories have emerged. One theory holds that Bottecchia was deliberately eliminated by supporters of Benito Mussolini's regime. Bottecchia's socialist leanings and fame put him at odds with Mussolini, and he very clearly wasn't above using violence to enforce his will. In Italy at the time, star cyclists were national symbols, so a hint of disloyalty from a beloved rider could make him a target. Decades later, the village priest who gave Bottecchia last rites reportedly admitted that the cyclist's fatal wounds were the result of a beating for his political beliefs. One story claims a local government official felt insulted by Ottavio's lack of allegiance to Mussolini. Under this theory, this individual sent black-shirt thugs to ambush him on his ride. No concrete proof ever emerged, but many still find this theory plausible. A more rustic tale blames a rural farmer for Bottecchia's death. Decades later, a farmer supposedly confessed on his deathbed that he caught Bottecchia in his vineyard eating grapes and angrily hurled a stone that knocked him unconscious. Realizing who it was, the panicked farmer dragged Bottecchia to the roadside and fled. This dramatic confession, while intriguing, has obvious gaps. It does not explain Bottecchia's multiple broken bones, and no witnesses ever confirmed the story. Another theory suggests that organized crime was involved. A Sardinian dock worker in New York allegedly confessed that he was hired by an Italian gambling ring to eliminate both Ottavio and his brother Giovanni. This suggests Giovanni's fatal accident and Ottavio's mysterious crash were both orchestrated hits. These claims were never verified, but they add a sinister mob element to the story. Ottavio Bottecchia's life was the stuff of legend well before it was cut short. He rose from poverty to conquer the Tour de France twice, becoming a symbol of hope and perseverance for his country. His mysterious demise, however, has in most ways overshadowed those athletic feats over the course of history. On a warm Sunday evening in July 2015, 28-year-old tech visionary Josh Greenberg was discovered lifeless in his Gainesville, Florida home. Greenberg was the co-founder of the once popular music streaming service Grooveshark, a pioneer of online music sharing that had just shut down amid legal battles. Josh Greenberg was a driven innovator and a beloved figure in his hometown. Born in 1987, Greenberg grew up in Florida and attended the University of Florida in Gainesville. It was there, as an undergraduate in 2006, that he teamed up with two classmates to create Grooveshark. Greenberg served as Chief Technology Officer, shaping the platform's technical vision. He also engaged in other ventures, co-founding a software startup and helping launch a local coding academy to train aspiring programmers. Energetic and passionate, Greenberg aimed to transform Gainesville into a place where startups could thrive. He was known for mentoring younger entrepreneurs and giving back generously. Grooveshark began as a scrappy student project, but quickly grew into a massive online music platform. Launched in the mid-2000s, it allowed users to upload and stream music for free, putting virtually any song at their fingertips. This YouTube for Music approach filled a niche in the pre-Spotify era. Before long, Grooveshark amassed over 35 million users worldwide at its peak. The startup punched above its weight, even attracting major advertisers and reportedly generating tens of millions in revenue despite minimal funding. For a time, Greenberg and his team rode high as music streaming pioneers, turning their college experiment into a global service. Grooveshark became a popular name among tech-savvy music lovers, and its success put Gainesville on the map as an unlikely tech hub. Yet the very feature that made Grooveshark popular, letting users upload any music, also made it controversial. Unlike licensed platforms, Grooveshark didn't initially pay royalties for much of its vast song library. The young founders insisted they operated within the law, citing that they were just a hosting platform, but many in the music industry vehemently disagreed. Critics accused Grooveshark of building a business on pirated content and cheating artists out of earnings. Despite warnings, the platform managed to attract millions of users and high-profile sponsors, even as record labels grew increasingly alarmed. By the early 2000s, Grooveshark was embroiled in a protracted legal battle with the major record companies. Universal Music Group, Sony Music, and Warner Music joined forces to sue the startup for massive copyright infringement damages. The litigation dragged on for 4 years, casting a shadow over Grooveshark's future. In April 2015, facing the risk of crippling penalties, Greenberg and his co-founders agreed to an out-of-court settlement. This deal allowed Grooveshark to avoid potentially hundreds of millions of dollars in fines had the case gone to trial. They shut down Grooveshark's website and, in a public letter to users, apologized for the mistakes of not securing proper music licenses. A court order soon followed in May 2015, forcing the service to stay closed and its parent company to pay $50 million to rights holders. It was the end of Grooveshark's 8-year run. The closure of Grooveshark was a bitter moment, but those closest to Josh Greenberg say he made peace with it. Having finally resolved the lawsuit that had loomed over him for years, Greenberg was surprisingly upbeat. According to his mother, he felt more relieved than defeated after shutting down the company. He had already begun turning his attention to new opportunities, carrying on with the positive attitude he was known for in Gainesville's startup scene. Less than 3 months after Grooveshark's demise, tragedy struck. On July 19, 2015, Josh Greenberg's girlfriend returned from a weekend trip and found him unresponsive in their bed. A day earlier, he had seemed perfectly healthy, so this loss came without any warning. Police investigators were baffled. There were no signs of foul play whatsoever, but nor did the evidence suggest he did it to himself. It appeared that Greenberg simply died in his sleep, making his death all the more perplexing. An autopsy was performed, but the initial results found nothing conclusive. Greenberg had been physically healthy, and examiners saw no injuries or obvious medical conditions. Toxicology tests later revealed only trace amounts of common substances with nothing that could explain his death. In the official report, the cause of death remained unknown. The promising life of Josh Greenberg had ended as suddenly and mysteriously as a light switched off. News of Greenberg's untimely death sent shockwaves through his family, friends, and colleagues. Those closest to Josh were adamant on one point: this wasn't something he did himself. Despite the heartbreaking end of Grooveshark, everyone around him attested that he had been in good spirits throughout the summer of 2015. He was optimistic, excited about future projects, and finally free from the burden of litigation. His mother, Lori, stressed that she saw no signs of depression or despair in her son, reinforcing that he was looking forward to the next stage of his life. Investigators agreed. They found no evidence that Greenberg had intentionally hurt himself, just as they found no hint of any intruder or foul play in his home. Years later, the exact cause of Josh Greenberg's death remains an unsolved mystery. It's a haunting reminder that life can be unpredictable and fragile, even for someone seemingly young and healthy. Hey everyone, it's Jimmy here with another reminder to hit subscribe and the notification bell if you're appreciating my content. Also, don't forget to check out the Patreon and the YouTube membership if you want to take your support up to the next level. On a cold winter night in 1799, 22-year-old Elma Sands left her Manhattan boarding house with a secret. She planned to elope with Levy Weeks. She never returned. 11 days later, her lifeless body was pulled from the bottom of a well in Lower Manhattan, shocking the city and setting the stage for one of America's first sensational trials. The investigation and trial that followed would captivate the public, pit powerful lawyers against each other, and leave a mystery that still haunts New York history. Elma Sands lived in a Greenwich Street boarding house run by her cousins, Catherine and Elias Ring. On December 22, 1799, she confided that she and Levy Weeks, a fellow boarder who had been courting her, were going to marry in secret that night. Around 8 that night, she left home, presumably with Levy. By 10, Weeks had returned alone, expressing surprise that Elma was still out and denying that they had been together earlier. When Elma didn't come home, alarm spread quickly. New York was blanketed in snow that evening, and some witnesses claimed they saw Elma riding in a one-horse sleigh with 2 men. One reportedly resembled Weeks, and the horse matched one owned by Levy's brother Ezra. Suspicion fell on Weeks as the last person seen with her, but nothing came of it just yet. A few days later, boys discovered a woman's hat floating in the water of a well in Manhattan, in what's now the Soho area. It was recognized as Elma's, pointing investigators to the well. On January 2nd, 1800, searchers pulled Elma's body from the bottom of that well. Her corpse showed clear signs of foul play, and authorities started to investigate, with Weeks swiftly deemed the prime suspect. Even before Weeks was brought to trial, the city was outraged over Elma's fate. The Ring family immediately accused Levy in public, sharing details of her disappearance with the press. New York newspapers ran with the story, and soon the case was the talk of the town. In the court of public opinion, Weeks was considered guilty before he was even arrested. In a macabre twist, Elma's body was put on public display at the boarding house for several days before burial. So many people came to view the victim's body that the coffin had to be moved outside to accommodate the onlookers. This grim exhibition further stirred emotions. Seeing Elma's pale form made the tragedy real and intensified calls for justice. By the time Weeks was indicted, angry crowds were clamoring for his swift execution. Levy Weeks was a young carpenter who worked for his wealthy brother Ezra Weeks, one of New York's most prominent builders. Desperate to save Levy from a likely hanging, Ezra pulled in favors and used his connections to secure an extraordinary defense team. Notably, Ezra's company had built Alexander Hamilton's mansion, so to say he had some clout would be an understatement. Alexander Hamilton and Aaron Burr, usually bitter political rivals, agreed to join forces to defend Weeks. They enlisted a third attorney, Henry Brockholst Livingston, an experienced trial lawyer, and future Supreme Court justice. This dream team of counsel was unprecedented and turned the trial into a major public spectacle. The trial of Levy Weeks began on March 31, 1800 in New York City Hall before Chief Justice John Lansing, Jr. The case became so widely followed that crowds of onlookers from all levels of society packed the courtroom. The prosecution's case, led by Cadwallader Colden, was entirely circumstantial, with no eyewitnesses. Prosecutors argued that Weeks had seduced Elma with false promises of marriage and then eliminated her to escape the scandal, perhaps fearing she was carrying his child. Boarders from the Ring House testified about Levy and Elma's relationship and the events of the night she vanished. One witness claimed to see him lurking around the well at night shortly before the crime. Another witness, a fellow boarder, claimed that Levy was the type to get into intimate situations with young ladies and leave them high and dry. He claimed that Levy promised them marriage, but insisted he couldn't do this without banging harder than a carriage wheel hitting cobblestone. Hamilton, Burr, and Livingston vigorously countered these claims. The defense cast doubt on every aspect of the story. They argued there may not even have been a killing at all. To support this theory, they brought in medical witnesses who now asserted that Elma might have jumped into the well herself out of despair. Acquaintances described Elma as emotionally troubled before her death, even recalling that she had questioned the purpose of life. Further, they insinuated that she may have been having affairs with married men, including her cousin's husband. The trial was unusually long for its time, running into the early morning hours of the second day. As proceedings dragged past midnight, jurors struggled to stay awake. Justice Lansing refused to pause for rest and even denied the prosecutor a closing argument, signaling that he found the evidence against Weeks weak. In his charge to the jury, Lansing bluntly stated that the proof was insufficient to convict. It took the jury only about 5 minutes to deliberate before returning a verdict of not guilty. Levy Weeks was acquitted, ending the trial in astonishing fashion. The verdict did not calm the public's fury. Many New Yorkers were outraged that Weeks walked free, believing that a rich man's influence had helped him escape punishment. Judge Lansing's conduct was widely criticized as a betrayal of justice. In the aftermath, Weeks was shunned and harassed. Unable to live in New York amid the hostility, he left the city and eventually settled in Natchez, Mississippi, where he quietly rebuilt his life as an architect until his death in 1819. No one else was ever charged for Elma's death, which meant the case remained officially unsolved. Some key figures in the trial later met tragic ends. In 1804, Burr and Hamilton's simmering rivalry exploded in their famous duel. Years later, in 1829, Judge Lansing vanished without a trace, leading some to whisper about a curse tied to Elma Sands. While it looks to me that there wasn't sufficient evidence to find Levy Weeks guilty, there's no denying that the proceedings carried a troubling stench of influence and favoritism. The entire case rested on circumstantial fragments, yet the speed with which the judge dismissed the prosecution's arguments felt unusual even by early American standards. Lansing's refusal to allow a full closing argument and his insistence on pushing the jury through exhaustion are odd choices. However, his pointed remarks about the weakness of the evidence creates the impression that the outcome had been shaped long before the verdict was delivered. Add to that the towering presence of Hamilton and Burr, both political powerhouses with deep ties to Ezra Weeks, and the appearance of a slanted playing field becomes hard to ignore. Levy may have walked free because the evidence wasn't strong enough, but the way the trial unfolded left many convinced justice had been openly bent. Imagine a brilliant physicist spoken of in the same breath as Galileo and Newton, stepping onto a ship one evening and vanishing without a trace. This is exactly what happened in 1938 when Ettore Majorana, a prodigious Italian scientist, disappeared under eerie circumstances. But this isn't your usual missing person case, and it turns out that there's very good evidence to suggest he actually lived his life out half a world away. Ettore Majorana was born in Catania, Sicily, on August 5, 1906, into a well-off family of intellectuals. From a young age, he showed exceptional, and perhaps even prodigious, mathematical talent. He initially pursued engineering at university, likely due to his father's influence, but ultimately switched to physics, where he fell into the circle of legendary physicist Enrico Fermi. Majorana quickly stood out even among these bright minds, astonishing peers and mentors with elegant solutions to tough problems. His contributions to theoretical physics were profound, though he had little interest in publishing papers. He tackled quantum theory and subatomic particles, and he even anticipated the existence of the neutron before it was officially discovered. Majorana's modesty and reluctance to publish meant he only authored 9 scientific papers in his life, but those few works left an enduring legacy. Despite, or perhaps because of, his brilliance, Majorana became increasingly reclusive and troubled in the mid-1930s. After a fruitful period working with renowned physicists like Werner Heisenberg in Germany and Niels Bohr in Copenhagen, Majorana returned to Italy with a growing sense of isolation. He saw his own work as trivial and was often reluctant to share his breakthroughs. Friends and colleagues noted that he withdrew from social life. For several years, he largely shut himself away, avoiding even close family and friends. In late 1937, however, he took a post as a full professor of theoretical physics at the University of Naples, an extraordinary appointment for a 31-year-old. This role brought him out of isolation briefly, as he began teaching in early 1938. Yet, those around him could see he was not at ease. Majorana was devoutly Catholic and prone to what have been called mystical crises, and he seemed burdened by internal conflicts. These personal struggles, which may be viewed as bouts of acute mental illness, foreshadowed the dramatic steps he would soon take. In late March 1938, Majorana's inner turmoil came to a head. Without warning, he withdrew all the money from his bank account and even collected back pay he had never bothered to pick up, signs that he was putting his affairs in order. On March 25, 1938, Majorana left Naples, likely aboard the steamer Città di Palermo, bound for Sicily. Before departing, he penned a cryptic letter to his colleague and friend Antonio Carelli, the director of the Naples Physics Institute. In this note, Majorana stated he had made an unavoidable decision and apologized for the trouble his sudden disappearance would cause. He asked Carelli to remember him kindly to colleagues and students, hinting that by the time the letter was read, he might already be gone. This sounded ominously like a farewell. Yet the very same evening, Majorana sent a follow-up telegram from Palermo in Sicily that baffled everyone. It said that the sea had quote-unquote rejected him and that he'd be heading back tomorrow. This dramatic phrase suggested that Majorana had a serious change of heart. Some interpret it to mean he might have tried eliminating himself by jumping into the sea during the voyage, but then survived or reconsidered. True to his word, he appeared to purchase a return ticket and may have boarded a ship back to Naples on March 26th. In fact, there were unconfirmed reports that colleagues saw him on the Naples-bound boat or back in Naples shortly thereafter. However, after that point, Ettore Majorana was never seen again in the official record. When he failed to reappear, his family and friends panicked. Majorana's disappearance was reported to the authorities, and an intensive search was launched both in Sicily and on the Italian mainland. The news that such a famed physicist had vanished triggered a massive response. Majorana's family, colleagues, and the Italian police undertook a frantic search, scouring passenger lists, ports, and coastlines for any trace of him. Even Majorana's mentor Enrico Fermi intervened at the highest levels. Fermi, who deeply appreciated Majorana's unique genius, reportedly told his wife that if Ettore had decided to disappear, he was clever enough that no one would ever find him. Notably, this statement has later been interpreted as indicating that Fermi may have known more than he was letting on, as you'll see shortly. Despite this grim acknowledgement of Majorana's cunning, Fermi was determined to try. He even appealed to Italy's leader Benito Mussolini to dedicate government resources to finding the missing scientist. Convincing Mussolini that this was a matter of national security, an extensive manhunt ensued. Ships and hospitals were checked, and the Italian Navy combed the sea routes, but nothing concrete emerged. The only clues left behind were Majorana's haunting letters. In his hotel room in Naples, a short note addressed to his family was found. It told them not to mourn him in traditional black clothing, perhaps signifying that he had simply disappeared and wasn't actually deceased. Over the ensuing decades, numerous theories emerged to explain what might have happened to the vanishing genius. One popular idea is that Majorana foresaw the destructive power of nuclear physics and chose to disappear to avoid any role in it. While Majorana's colleagues like Fermi did go on to work on the Manhattan Project, there's no direct evidence that Majorana himself voiced such fears before he vanished. Still, the timing and his brilliance make this theory enticing, a genius fleeing the future he predicted. Over the years, there were numerous reported sightings of Majorana in places like Argentina and Venezuela. Some hypothesized that he secretly fled Italy, possibly motivated by guilt or a desire to live anonymously, far from the looming conflict in Europe. In fact, in the 1950s, an Italian television claimed to have tracked him down to Venezuela, where he was living a simple life under an assumed identity. The only problem with this theory, though, is that they decided to continue to let him live his life of quiet anonymity. Some have speculated that the producers could have simply made up this narrative for a television series, given the popularity of the case in Italy. That said, of course, it's also possible that they did track him down, and that they chose to respect his wishes. I'll come back to this theory in a moment, though, since there was a recent explosive development relating to that Italian documentary. Others, of course, believe that Majorana may have simply ended his own life, though this theory has been hotly contested. Majorana's devout Catholic faith and the absence of a body, as well as the note telling his family not to mourn in black, are all factors against this. Further, there's also the fact that he appears to have rejected the idea of ending himself when he came back from Sicily. A theory favored by Majorana's own family was that he suffered a spiritual or existential crisis and retreated to a monastery in Italy. Given his religious devotion, they speculated he might have chosen a life of seclusion and contemplation over fame. Indeed, his priest and confessor hinted that Ettore had experienced deep mystical episodes and may have had other plans for his life. Naturally, though, this priest couldn't come out and say what happened even if he knew what did, so long as the context of what was said was during confession. This theory portrays Majorana's disappearance almost as a deliberate act of spiritual exile, mirroring the idea of the more physical self-exile from Italy. Like with Fermi, the fact that his confessor gave this cryptic statement has been viewed as somewhat unusual in light of subsequent happenings. There were even darker speculations that Majorana might have been kidnapped or killed because of the sensitive knowledge he possessed. Some wondered if agents of a foreign power, or even shadowy elements within Italy, abducted him to prevent his intellect from aiding another country's atomic projects. Given that Majorana would have almost certainly been working on the Manhattan Project if he had followed Fermi to America, this idea has gathered a lot of steam. That said, while it may be interesting to speculate about, there's no evidence whatsoever to suggest this was the case. Remarkably, the case saw a revival in the 21st century when new clues emerged. In 2011, an elderly witness came forward in Italy claiming not only to have seen Majorana alive in the late 1940s, but even to have befriended him in Buenos Aires. This prompted the Rome Attorney's Office to officially reopen the investigation 73 years after Majorana vanished. Soon, a photograph surfaced, allegedly showing Majorana, under the name Mr. Beanie, living in Valencia in Venezuela in 1955. Forensic analysts compared this photo with images of Majorana and found a number of striking similarities in facial features. Also, if you're one of those people who just listens This may be a good time to take a look and see if you can see the resemblance between the two men. Adding to the intrigue, reports emerged of a postcard written by Majorana's uncle that was purportedly found among the belongings of this mysterious individual. These pieces of evidence strongly suggested that Majorana had survived and lived in South America under an assumed identity. Following these developments, Italian authorities announced an official conclusion. In February 2015, the Rome Attorney's Office declared that he likely lived abroad in Venezuela, at least from 1955 to 1959. No criminal act was identified. In other words, the investigation found that Majorana likely chose to remove himself from his former life. With that statement, the decades-old case was closed from a legal standpoint. It's an astonishing outcome. After so many years of uncertainty, the authorities essentially concluded that the genius physicist quietly lived out his life in obscurity. The official verdict has not put an end to the fascination with Majorana's story. Even if he did live incognito in Venezuela, many unanswered questions remain. Why would a scientist of Majorana's caliber abandon a promising career and family to live in hiding? Was he truly driven by a moral objection to nuclear weapons, overwhelming anxiety, or something else we may never understand? It's also unknown what ultimately became of him after 1959. If he lived longer, he appears to have kept an exceedingly low profile. In 2025, nearly 87 years after he vanished, an Italian court finally declared Ettore Majorana presumed dead, providing legal closure to his status. It was a routine spring afternoon on a quiet country road in Texas, when a mother stopped her pickup truck to drop off her two young daughters. Moments later, one of them, a 2-year-old girl named Desiree Carroll, vanished into thin air. In March 1983, 2-year-old Desiree was living with her mother, Anne Elizabeth Carroll, and 5-year-old sister, Heather, in a rural area near the small town of Cost, Texas. They had moved into a house owned by Anne's boyfriend, David Morris. Desiree's parents were divorced. Anne had custody, but her ex-husband Reggie still visited the girls regularly. On March 25, 1983, Anne set out on an errand in nearby Marlin and left her daughters at the start of the long dirt driveway leading up to their home. Heather was able to walk to the house on her own, and Desiree was supposed to follow. But as Anne's pickup truck pulled away, Desiree tried to chase after it instead of going with her sister. That was the last time anyone saw her. When Anne returned later that day, Desiree was nowhere to be found, and a frantic search began. Authorities and volunteers immediately mobilized to scour the area for the missing toddler. Hundreds of people from several counties combed the woods around the Carroll home, aided by law enforcement and even National Guard units. They searched tirelessly on foot and by air. At one point, heavy rain drenched the area, hindering the volunteers and possibly washing away any tracks or clues. Even with a full week of effort, not a single piece of evidence was found. Not a footprint, not a scrap of clothing. Baffled local authorities even called in help from the Texas Rangers and the FBI as days passed with no sign of the child. With no leads from the search, investigators turned a wary eye toward those closest to the child. About a week after the disappearance, the Limestone County Sheriff held a meeting with other officers to share notes and observations. They found it odd that Anne and David displayed so little emotion in the wake of Desiree's disappearance. In a curious move, Anne and David left their home a few days after the tragedy and went to a motel in Waco, saying they needed to get away from the volunteer searchers. These circumstances raised suspicions that perhaps something other than a simple lost child scenario had occurred. That said, it's important to note that many of these searchers appear to have believed they were responsible for Desiree's disappearance. Personally, I suspect Anne's odd behavior may have stemmed from the fact that she left her toddler in the care of a 5-year-old. Regardless if there was any criminal culpability to that act, leaving a 2-year-old in that sort of situation is highly questionable. Investigators pursued every theory they could think of to explain Desiree's vanishing. They determined that she may have simply gotten lost in the woods in the wilderness near her home, but if this was accurate, it was odd that no signs were found. Of course, they also investigated if she had been killed by her parents, but they weren't able to find any evidence of this either. Another theory they pursued was that she was secretly given away to another person to raise, since they didn't want the burden of dealing with her. Anne, burdened by grief and scrutiny that she may have been involved, turned to activism. Just weeks after her daughter vanished, she testified before the Texas legislature to urge better protections for children. Her emotional testimony helped prompt a new state law offering free fingerprinting of children, so that identifying records would be available if a child ever went missing. Personally, I suspect that she wouldn't have done this if she had actually been responsible for her daughter going missing. Decades have passed, but the mystery of what happened to Desiree Carroll endures. In 2018, Desiree's sister Heather passed away at age 40, and Heather's obituary listed Desiree as having predeceased her. Officially, Desiree is still a missing person, and her profile remains in law enforcement databases. Hey everyone, it's Jimmy here with another reminder to hit subscribe and the notification bell if you're appreciating my content. Also, don't forget to check out the Patreon and the YouTube membership if you want to take your support up to the next level. Tara Grinstead was a 30-year-old high school history teacher and former beauty queen living in the small town of Ocilla, Georgia. She taught 11th grade history at Irwin County High School and was known for her vibrant personality and dedication to her students. During her college years, Tara had been active in pageants, and she won a local Miss Tifton title and even competed for Miss Georgia, using scholarship winnings to help pay for school. By 2005, she was a beloved figure in Ocilla's community and served as a mentor for young women on a similar life path that she had taken. Unfortunately, this beloved local teacher's life was about to be cut tragically short. On Saturday, October 22nd, 2005, Tara spent the day involved in the beauty pageant world she loved. She helped a friend prepare contestants for the local Miss Sweet Potato pageant and attended the event that evening as a coach and supporter. After the pageant, she visited a friend's house and then went to a neighbor's cookout, socializing into the night. Witnesses later recalled that around 11 p.m., Tara was walked to her car by a friend after the cookout, and she then headed home to her nearby house by herself. That weekend, Tara failed to return phone calls, and an acquaintance, a local police captain, reportedly tried to reach her multiple times on Sunday without success. However, it wasn't until Monday that her friends and family realized that something had gone terribly wrong. On the morning of Monday, October 24th, Tara did not show up for work at the high school, and her unexplained absence immediately alarmed her co-workers. Concerned colleagues contacted the authorities to do a welfare check at her home. Police arrived at Tara Grinstead's residence later that day and found an eerie scene. Her car was parked in the driveway, and inside the house they discovered Tara's cell phone and an unlocked door, but there was no sign of Tara herself. Oddly, her purse and keys were missing, suggesting she had left the house with those personal items and had not returned. Investigators noted there were no obvious signs of forced entry into the home, and no indications of a struggle such as broken furniture or blood evidence. The scene was essentially undisturbed, apart from the mystery of Tara's disappearance. Given these suspicious circumstances, local police immediately called upon the Georgia Bureau of Investigation to take the lead. As the GBI took charge, a massive search effort unfolded in Ocilla and the surrounding areas. Law enforcement and volunteers from the community mobilized quickly. They canvassed neighborhoods, distributed flyers, put up billboards, and organized ground searches in hopes of finding any trace of Tara. Despite these efforts, days and then weeks passed with no significant leads. Early on, investigators did recover one potentially crucial piece of evidence just outside Tara's home: a latex glove lying in her yard. Forensic testing revealed the glove bore DNA from an unknown male, raising the strong possibility that Tara had encountered someone the night she went missing. However, this clue led to frustration rather than a quick solution, as the DNA didn't match any of the dozens of men investigators tested. The glove's origin remained a mystery, suggesting the presence of an unidentified man at Tara's house, but giving no further leads to pursue. With physical evidence scarce, the early investigation had to explore every conceivable angle. Detectives conducted interviews with people in Tara's life and checked her phone records and computer for hints. In the absence of quick answers, numerous theories and suspects were scrutinized during those early years. One focus of suspicion was Tara's ex-boyfriend, Marcus Harper, a former Ocilla police officer and Army Ranger. Their long relationship had ended not long before Tara disappeared, and some wondered if a jealous rage or dispute might explain her fate. Harper was thoroughly investigated by authorities and was fully cooperative throughout. He voluntarily provided DNA samples, allowed searches of his vehicle, and fully accounted for his whereabouts on the night in question. His alibi checked out, and his DNA didn't match the glove, leading police to conclude Harper wasn't involved. Another individual examined was Anthony Vickers, a former student of Tara's. Earlier in 2005, Vickers had caused a disturbance outside Tara's home, an incident that resulted in his arrest for disorderly conduct. Given that prior incident, investigators interviewed him regarding the disappearance, but they found no evidence tying Vickers to it and didn't consider him a suspect in Tara's case. With those close to Tara seemingly cleared, some theories speculated that she might have fallen victim to a stranger abduction or a crime of opportunity. After over a decade of frustration, a major break in the case finally arrived in 2017. The catalyst was an unexpected tip, preceded by a resurgence of public interest. In 2016, a podcast called Up and Vanished devoted its first season to Tara's disappearance, bringing new attention to the long-dormant mystery. Not long after the podcast aired, a young woman came forward to the GBI with crucial information. This woman, Brooke Sheridan, was the girlfriend of Bo Dukes, a former friend and classmate of a man named Ryan Duke. Both men had been students at Irwin County High when Tara taught there years before. She told investigators that, after the increased publicity on the case brought on by the podcast, Bo Dukes had confessed to her that he knew what happened to Tara. Acting on this tip, authorities re-interviewed those involved and soon made a stunning announcement. On February 23, 2017, they arrested Ryan Duke and charged him with the slaying of Tara Grinstead. Days later, Bo Dukes was also arrested, accused of helping conceal the crime and tampering with evidence. According to GBI investigators, Ryan Duke, who was 21 at the time of the crime, had allegedly broken into Tara's house in the late hours of October 22, 2005. They believe Tara caught him in the act, leading Duke to fatally attack her. After slaying her, Duke reportedly removed her body from the home. It was then, investigators say, that he enlisted the help of his friend Bo Dukes to dispose of the remains. Dukes, whose family owned a large farm in a neighboring county, later admitted that he assisted Ryan in hiding Tara's body. The two men allegedly took Tara's remains to a remote corner of the Dukes' family orchard and burned them to destroy evidence of the crime. This chilling revelation explained why exhaustive searches had never found Tara's body. Investigators even conducted a multi-day excavation of the orchard land in 2017 after the arrests, but they turned up no identifiable remains. The arrests of Ryan Duke and Bo Dukes, nearly 12 years after Tara Grinstead vanished, marked an extraordinary breakthrough. At long last, law enforcement announced that the mystery of Tara's disappearance had been solved, pending final confirmation in court. Now, with both suspects in custody, the focus turned to the legal system to deliver justice for Tara, and you're never going to believe what happened next. In the years following the 2017 arrests, the cases against the two men moved through the courts separately. Bo Dukes was the first to face trial. In March 2019, a jury convicted Dukes on charges related to covering up Tara's death. He was sentenced to the maximum of 25 years in prison for these offenses. Disturbingly, it was also revealed that he was a serial predator, committing multiple essay offenses against women in the intervening years. Ryan Duke, the alleged perpetrator himself, went to trial 3 years later in May 2022. The courtroom proceedings were dramatic. Although Ryan had initially confessed to the GBI, he recanted that confession and claimed it was actually Bo Dukes who was responsible. He now asserted that he had only helped destroy the evidence of the crime out of fear of Dukes. After a closely watched trial nearly 17 years after the crime, the jury delivered a split verdict. Ryan Duke was acquitted of Tara's slaying, as well as related charges of burglary and aggravated assault. This means the jury wasn't convinced beyond a reasonable doubt that he was the one who had ended her. However, the jury did find him guilty of the charge of concealing a death, reflecting his admitted involvement in the cover-up. A judge subsequently sentenced Ryan Duke to 10 years in prison for concealing Tara's death, the maximum penalty for that crime. Rico Harris was a 37-year-old former basketball prospect who once played for the Harlem Globetrotters. He disappeared in October 2014 during a solo drive from his mother's home in Southern California en route to Seattle. A few days after he left, Harris's black Nissan Maxima was found abandoned at a park in rural Yolo County, north of Sacramento, with no sign of Harris himself. Despite an intensive search of the surrounding wilderness by authorities, not a single trace of the 6'9", 300-pound athlete was found. Rico grew up in Los Angeles County and showed early promise as a basketball player. In his late teens, he blossomed into a high school standout, becoming one of the nation's top 100 recruits, courted by elite college programs like Connecticut, Kentucky, and UCLA. Unfortunately, Harris's path through college was tumultuous. He first enrolled at Arizona State University, but left after a freshman year arrest and academic issues. Harris then dominated at Los Angeles City College, leading the team to a state junior college championship in 1997. However, an attempt to transfer to a Division I program fell through due to a poor academic record. He finished his college career at Cal State Northridge, but his time there was marked by suspensions and conflicts with his coach. By 1999, perhaps unsurprisingly, the once promising player went undrafted in the NBA. Harris continued to pursue professional basketball on the fringe. In 2000, Rico joined the world-famous Harlem Globetrotters in hopes that this would raise his profile and he could move to a more legitimate basketball team. For those who aren't aware, the Globetrotters are a sports entertainment team, rather than a competitive basketball team. His tenure with the Globetrotters lasted only a couple of months. He later said he left due to a combination of a nagging back injury and a serious concussion from being hit in the head with a baseball bat while trying to break up a fight. With that, Harris's basketball ambitions were effectively cut short, aside from a few attempts to play in a short-lived semi-pro league called the International Basketball League. Life after basketball proved challenging, and Harris fell into substance abuse, with alcohol being his most major issue. He would struggle off and on, but by 2007 he committed to sobriety and pieced his life back together, finding steady work in private security in Los Angeles. In 2012, while working as a security manager at a nightclub, Harris met Jennifer Song, an insurance broker from Seattle who was visiting California. The two began a long-distance relationship. For over 2 years, they maintained their bond through phone calls, text messages, and weekend visits. By 2014, Harris was looking toward the future with newfound optimism. He was nearing 7 years of sobriety and decided to relocate to Seattle to live with Jennifer permanently. He gradually moved his belongings into her Seattle townhouse and also secured a promising job interview in the area. This transition was not without difficulty, and Harris initially felt homesick and under pressure, and in late July 2014, he briefly relapsed into his old drinking habits. By early October 2014, Harris was still committed to his move and his new life in Seattle, or at least that's what he wanted people to believe outwardly. In the first week of October 2014, Rico Harris decided to make an impromptu trip from Seattle down to Alhambra in California to visit his family before fully settling in Seattle. According to Jennifer, he felt he needed to talk with his mother and brother, possibly to find closure with some past issues and to reassure his family about his new path. On October 8, 2014, Harris told Jennifer he was going out to explore Seattle while she went to the gym. Instead, he secretly began the 1,000-mile drive south to see his family. He drove through the night and arrived at his mother Margaret Fernandez's home in Alhambra around 2 o'clock in the morning on October 9th. Margaret was surprised and concerned by her son's sudden visit, and she later said she suspected he had been drinking when he showed up. Shortly after midnight, in the early hours of October 10th, 2014, Rico Harris quietly slipped out of his mother's house and began the long drive back to Seattle. At about 1 a.m., he phoned his mother, who hadn't even realized he had left. He then called Jennifer to let her know he was already on the road north. Jennifer was startled that he had left without sleeping, and the two spoke by phone for approximately 3 to 4 hours as Harris drove through Central California. Jennifer later said she grew increasingly concerned during that call, and his speech and thoughts were giving her cause for worry. Eventually, sometime before dawn, Jennifer fell asleep while on the phone with him. Around 8 o'clock in the morning on October 10th, Jennifer awoke and called Harris back, and he reported that he was near Sacramento. Not long after, at 10:45 that same morning, Harris left a voicemail for Jennifer saying that he was, quote, going up into the mountains to rest for a while, before continuing the drive. He mentioned that he hadn't slept much and needed to pull over. Approximately 30 minutes later, around 11:15 a.m., his cell phone was switched off, but whether Harris turned it off or the battery died is not clear. This was the last anyone ever heard from him, though panic didn't immediately set in. By October 13th, however, Harris had missed his important job interview in Seattle and still hadn't contacted anyone. That same day, far to the north in Yolo County, California, a sheriff's deputy was making a routine patrol through a secluded rest area known as Cache Creek Regional Park. The deputy noticed a black Nissan Maxima parked off to the side of the lot. It had been there the day before as well, which struck him as odd. On October 13th, after seeing the car again untouched, the deputy ran the license plates and discovered it was registered to Rico Harris. He contacted the Alhambra Police Department in Los Angeles County to inquire about the owner. Alhambra Police, in turn, went to Margaret Fernandez's house that day to inform her that Rico's car had been found abandoned hundreds of miles away in Northern California. Margaret immediately realized something was very wrong and filed a missing person report for her son on October 13th, 2014, officially launching the investigation into his disappearance. In the days following the car's discovery, a few tantalizing clues emerged. Investigators learned that Harris had stopped for gas in Lodi, California, around 100 miles south of where his car was found, and then apparently deviated from the main interstate. Why he drove into the isolated Cache Creek area remains uncertain. He may have taken a wrong turn or intentionally driven into the hills to rest or sightsee. Several witnesses later reported seeing a large African-American man fitting Harris's description in the vicinity on October 11th and 12th. One passerby recalled a tall man walking along Route 16 in the early morning hours of October 11th. Another motorist believed he saw the same man sitting on a guardrail overlooking Cache Creek around that time. Additionally, a couple reported seeing a giant man wandering around a black car on October 12th, appearing disoriented. These sightings suggested that Harris was indeed alive and on foot in the area for at least a day or two after he left the highway. Search teams discovered very large shoe prints by the creek near the parking lot, including one set of fresh impressions that matched the size 18 sneakers Harris wore. They noted that the prints went down toward the water and then back up, as if someone had walked to the creek and returned. In the same vicinity, investigators found an insert from a shoe believed to be from Harris's footwear based upon the size alone. This indicated that Harris had likely been the person who parked the car there and had walked around the area. About 1,500 feet up the road from the parking lot, searchers also recovered Harris's black backpack, abandoned on the roadside. Inside it were jumper cables, some clothing, and 2 plastic bottles, one empty and one partially filled with hard liquor. Crucially, the backpack also contained Harris's cell phone and charger. On October 18th, another sighting of Rico was reported, and the authorities found fresh footprints, again from size 18 shoes. Yet despite these leads, searchers couldn't locate Harris. Sniffer dogs were brought in and signaled interest in a particular spot along the creek, prompting dive teams to search pools of water, but no evidence was found. In the absence of concrete answers, several theories have been put forward to explain what might have happened to Rico Harris. The lead detective on the case eventually came to believe that no foul play was involved, and that Harris may have voluntarily walked away from his life. The investigation found no evidence of struggle or violence at the scene. The car, the phone, and the backpack all appeared to have been left undisturbed by anyone other than Harris himself. The lead detective theorized that Harris might have taken a wrong turn off the highway, and upon finding the serene Cache Creek area, decided to stop and rest. It was noted that he had been under significant pressure. He was moving to a new city, potentially starting a new job, and struggling to maintain sobriety. Further, he was in the process of adjusting to living with his girlfriend. The authorities officially speculated that the weight of those unresolved personal issues and life changes may have led to Harris not returning to Seattle. Interestingly, the lead detective has gone on record saying that he believes that sometime after Rico's car was towed, Rico may have gotten a ride out of the area. A related theory has focused on Harris's psychological state. By all accounts, he was under severe stress. Lack of sleep, the cross-country move, and his recent relapse might have created a perfect storm. It's possible Harris experienced a mental health crisis or emotional breakdown in the hours leading up to his disappearance. If Harris became disoriented or suffered some kind of break, he might have intentionally walked away into a new life or inadvertently placed himself in danger. Some believe that he may have entered into a dissociative fugue and started a new life, either being unaware of his old identity or simply preferring his new life. That said, others have observed that his physical appearance would likely make it harder for him to start fresh, since he literally stands head and shoulders above everyone else. Another possibility is that Rico Harris intended to return to his journey after resting, but fell victim to an accident in the remote wilderness. Harris may have been exhausted and possibly dehydrated, and as suggested by the bottles in his backpack, he had relapsed once again. It's conceivable that while walking around in a fatigued state, he could have slipped and injured himself or gotten lost in the wild. A fall down a ravine or into the fast-moving creek could prove fatal. If he succumbed to exposure or injury, his remains might have been missed in the initial search, especially if they ended up in a concealed spot or were moved by natural elements. From the start, investigators didn't see obvious signs of foul play in Harris's case. There was no blood and no indication of a struggle at the car. Further yet, Harris was, to put it mildly, not an easy target, standing 6'9" and with a powerful build. That said, his friends and family knew him to be a mild-mannered individual who got along with everyone, and suspect that he may have let his guard down around the wrong people. Take yourself on a mental journey to the vast, empty expanse of the Pacific Ocean in the early 19th century. There we'll meet a creature that would launch a nearly 30-year conflict against humanity, directly inspire one of the greatest novels ever written, and give whales soul in the human mind. But for the crew of a whaling ship, this was a world of immense loneliness and ever-present danger, a place where voyages could stretch for years. The line between survival and oblivion was perilously thin at times. The closest humans not on your ship were hundreds to thousands of miles away. In this isolated world, stories were currency, cautionary tales, as a way to map the psychological terrain of their brutal profession. Sailors rounding the treacherous Cape Horn would exchange news and legends, but over time, one name began to surface more than any other. It wasn't the name of a captain or a ship, but of a whale. They called him Mocha Dick, the seaman slayer of the South Pacific. He was more than just an animal. He was a personality, a known adversary whose exploits were chronicled across the fleets. In an industry built on the anonymous slaughter of an intelligent creature viewed as a natural resource, the simple act of giving this one whale a name was a profound admission. It acknowledged that this creature was different, an individual force to be reckoned with. Mocha Dick was an old bull sperm whale of staggering proportions, a true leviathan. When he was finally slain and measured, his body stretched over 70 feet from head to tail, making him among the largest individual toothed whales to ever be documented. But it was his coloring, rather than his immense length and girth, that first seared him into the memories of sailors. He was described as being as white as wool, a spectral figure against the deep blue of the ocean. From a distance, a lookout might mistake him for a white cloud drifting on the horizon, or a snowdrift breaking the waves. This ghostly appearance, likely a result of albinism or simply extreme age, made him instantly recognizable. His uniqueness didn't end there. Unlike most sperm whales whose skin is relatively smooth, Mocha Dick's giant battering ram of a head was rugged and heavily encrusted with a thick layer of barnacles. This gave him a gnarled, fearsome appearance, as if he wore a kind of natural god-tier armor forged over decades of battle. Even the way he breathed was distinct. A typical sperm whale spouts at an angle, with a short, puffing noise. Mocha Dick, however, was said to spray water in a powerful, continuous, and vertical column, a blast accompanied by a steady roar that sounded to sailors like a freight train. And in an effort to make sure my video isn't demonetized, I'm going to refrain from making the obvious joke here. I'll let you guys fill that hole in the comments. These features, his color, his armored head, his thundering spout, created an unmistakable profile. When whalers saw him, they knew exactly who they were facing. Yet, for all his intimidating features, Mocha Dick possessed a remarkably complex temperament. Accounts from multiple sources agree on a crucial point. When sailors treated him with respect, he was surprisingly docile. He was known to swim peacefully alongside ships, a gentle giant moving with lazy grace among the very boats designed for his destruction. This peaceful nature, however, was a thin veil, and if seamen would try to blast him with a harpoon, this soft, gentle giant would harden with astonishing rapidity. Mocha Dick's career as the Pacific's most formidable defender wasn't a brief affair. His legend was built over a span of nearly 30 years. The first documented encounters and attacks occurred sometime before 1810, and he would continue to haunt the whaling grounds off the coast of Chile until his brutal end. Over these decades, he amassed a combat record that became the stuff of legend around tavern tables in Nantucket and across the whaling world. The numbers, while likely embellished through the natural process of sailors telling and retelling tall tales, speak to the scale of his reputation. Some accounts claim he was involved in over 100 separate skirmishes with whaling crews. He was credited with the destruction of at least 20 whaleboats, which are the smaller oar-powered crafts launched from the main ship. According to his legend, he ate up a truly remarkable amount of seamen in these encounters, with some figures citing as many as 30 sailors gobbled up. This figure is disputed by some modern historians as impossibly high given the records of the time. What is true, however, is that he was the veteran of countless battles over the decades, and until his last, he always won. His fame grew to the point that he became a fixture in the daily lives of whalers, and when ships would cross paths on sea routes, they would ask about any sightings. While most avoided the creature, for some ambitious whaling captains, an encounter with Mocha Dick was the ultimate test of skill and courage. These captains would intentionally sail their vessels near his home territory off Mocha Island, hoping for a chance to challenge the King of the Pacific. Over his course of combat with his challengers, he learned various techniques to get the best of the whalers. For instance, he would maneuver in a way so as to present his broad, powerful back to harpooners, ensuring his weaker parts weren't penetrated. The physical evidence of his one-whale crusade against these men was etched into his very body. He was said to trail 50 to 100 yards of multiple old harpoon line from his back, the tattered remnants of past victories. Now let me just get into the whaling industry and whales themselves here for a moment. The 19th century whaling industry wasn't a small-scale operation. It was a global economic engine, and essentially the energy sector of its day. Before the discovery of petroleum in 1859, the modern world ran on whale oil. It was the fuel that lit the lamps of burgeoning cities from London to New York, and the lubricant that greased the gears and machinery of the Industrial Revolution. At its peak in the mid-1840s, the American whaling fleet alone numbered over 700 vessels, making the industry a cornerstone of the young nation's economy. Whaling voyages were monumental undertakings. A ship might be at sea for up to 4 years at a time, pushing into the most remote and uncharted corners of the globe in pursuit of its quarry. This immense globe-spanning network is what allowed the story of a single whale off the coast of South America to become a pervasive legend in New England. Ultimately, though, it was a dirty and inhumane business that ended up decimating the populations of some of the world's most majestic creatures. Sperm whales possess the largest brain of any animal, and they're highly intelligent, sociable animals that many scientists believe are completely self-aware. These animals have extremely strong family bonds and are believed to be able to actively think, much like a human. In this context, the story of Mocha Dick is likely more of a story of revenge than the whalers of the time realized. It's entirely possible that this great beast's family was slain, and he came to a conscious decision to crusade against whalers in particular. As evidence for this, Mocha Dick would come up next to vessels and swim along peacefully until he was attacked, at which point he would become a force of nature. While we can't know for sure, personally, I feel like as we have a greater understanding of whale intelligence, we may have a pretty firm answer on this one day. That said, I think his final encounter will prove that this whale was acting out of some sort of higher calling. After decades of victorious encounters, the life of Mocha Dick came to a dramatic and tragic end in 1838. The story of his final battle was immortalized in an 1839 article by the American writer and explorer Jeremiah Reynolds. According to Reynolds' account, the conflict didn't begin with an attack on Mocha Dick himself. Instead, the whalers had targeted a female sperm whale and had just succeeded in slaying her calf. As the mother whale grieved over her whale child, Mocha Dick appeared. In what was described as an act of selfless intervention, the old warrior charged into the fray, not to save himself, but to defend the distraught mother. This single detail reframed the entire narrative for the 19th century audience. His final act wasn't one of instinctive aggression, but of apparent compassion and altruism. He attacked the whale boats with his customary fury, but this time, his heroism was his undoing. The battle was fierce. Reynolds' narrative paints a vivid picture of the chaos. The massive white whale charging, the small boat being tossed on the waves, the hiss of the harpoon finding its mark, and the line smoking as Mocha was about to take them to the abyss. This time, however, there would be no escape, and Mocha Dick's power faded. Mortally wounded, the great whale entered his death throes. He thrashed his enormous flukes, turning the sea into what Reynolds described as a, quote, whirlpool of bloody foam. Then, with one final convulsive effort to twist free, he turned slowly onto his side and lay still, a dead mass upon the ocean he had ruled for so long. When the whalers brought the massive carcass alongside their ship, the scale of their victory became clear. At over 70 feet, he was one of the largest whales they had ever seen, and he yielded an astonishing 100 barrels of oil, double the amount of a usual bull. And as they stripped this whale emperor of his blubber, they found the final silent testament to his life of struggle. There were 19 rusted harpoon heads that he had carried with him for years, the scars of his crusade against the whaling industry. While no one knew it at the time, Mocha Dick's passing was the beginning of his immortality. In May 1839, Jeremiah Reynolds published his dramatic account of the whale's life in a popular New York publication, the Knickerbocker magazine. Among the readers of that magazine was a young man named Herman Melville. Reynolds' article planted a seed in Melville's imagination, providing him with the core concept for the antagonist of what would become his masterpiece. It's a crucial point of history that Melville's novel, Moby Dick, wasn't inspired by a single event, but was a masterful synthesis of two separate true stories. The first was the tale of Mocha Dick. From Reynolds' article, Melville took the character of his great white whale. However, for all his ferocity, there were no credible accounts of Mocha Dick ever sinking a large three-masted whaling ship, only the smaller whaling boats. For that plot point, Melville turned to a different, equally true, and even more horrifying event: the 1820 sinking of the whale ship Essex. The Essex, out of Nantucket, was rammed and sunk in the middle of the Pacific by an enormous enraged whale, leaving its surviving crew to turn one member into an item on the menu. The world that created Mocha Dick is gone, and in perhaps one of the most bizarre twists of history, this whale won his final victory against humanity. Though Moby Dick wasn't born from an activist's pen, it became one of the most powerful literary sparks for modern anti-whaling sentiment. When Herman Melville released his novel in 1851, he was dissecting humanity's arrogance toward nature. Captain Ahab's relentless hunt for the white whale was an allegory for mankind's doomed crusade to dominate the natural world. For the first time, readers were forced to see the whale not as oil and bone, but as an intelligent, mysterious being, a thinking adversary rather than a resource. In a century that glorified whaling as industry and adventure, Moby Dick quietly planted the seed of moral doubt. Its visceral depictions of the realities of the trade made whaling feel less heroic and more horrific. Ishmael's awe toward the whale's majesty contrasted with Ahab's madness, suggesting that reverence, not conquest, was the truer path. This inversion of values anticipated the ecological awakening that would come a century later. So while Melville certainly didn't attend any whale conservation meetings, his novel did something greater. It gave whales souls in the human imagination. Without that transformation, campaigns to, quote, save the whales might never have resonated as deeply. Moby Dick turned a beast into a symbol, and a symbol into a movement. Without Mocha Dick's unrelenting conflict against whalers, Moby Dick would have never been written, and our world would be completely different today.